Welcome back to Season 2 of Illuminating Leadership. This season, we'll explore how leaders and employees can best navigate the new workplace, with specific emphasis on how culture impacts engagement. I'm your host and leadership development coach, Beth Johnson, and I'm so glad you're here. If you like what you hear today, head over to patreon.com at Illuminating Leadership. Remember, that's Lumen with an E, and subscribe for exclusive coaching benefits and rewards that you won't find on my other platforms. Things like live Q&As, ad-free content, monthly group coaching, and much more. I hope to see you there. And now, on with the show. Hey, you guys, welcome back. I am here today with my guest, Jason Rutledge, who most recently served as an operations director in telecommunications, and as always, serves as dad to 4 gorgeous kiddos and his beautiful wife, April. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I am thrilled that you're here. And as you know, we're taking a different approach in season 2. And I'd like to get right into it. The workplace has changed. Leadership is changing. So let's explore that. You good with that?
I'm great with that.
Okay, fantastic. In your opinion, what is the primary role, the most important role of a very good leader?
A very good leader, effective leader, is going to promote and create an environment where people are able to work together to do their jobs and to advance the goals of the organization forward. Right. So that's,
Yep.
I mean, it's just a matter of either getting people to work together or getting them to, some people work better independently, but you've got to make sure if you've got a cluster of people that are working together, that they're put together correctly. And if you've got a lone wolf who's just good at going out and doing their own thing and they're great at their job, then you help facilitate that. You have to be able to recognize those things.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? Is paying enough attention to the team to understand who is that lone wolf, who's the overproducer, who's the one that's not engaged at all, right? And that sounds like a big ask, right? Having been leaders ourselves, we know that that's easier said than done, the time that it takes. So what's your best advice for new, current, future leaders? How do you accomplish that, as well as all of your other measurable tasks?
Take your time. Especially if you're new in the organization, if you just come into this role and you want to make sure that you get to know your people first. So unless there's something that is going on that has to be changed immediately, the best thing that you can do is take a step back and just observe. And that might take 3-6 months. I mean, it takes time to learn the organization, learn the folks you're working with, and then start implementing the things that you want to implement. Do it slowly and do it the correct way. And even if you've been part of that organization to begin with, you still, once you've taken and assumed that role, there are some dynamics and some things that are going to change, and you still want to implement things slowly. It'll work better working with the folks that you're working with. They'll respect you a lot more for that.
Well, and I've made that mistake early on in my career. You come in gung-ho and you're all excited about what you can bring to the organization and to the team, and you've got all these ideas. And it is overwhelming for the team themselves. They're like, wait a second, we just went from this manager or leader to you. We've got to get to know you as well, right?
I have been in situations in the past where somebody wasn't happy that perhaps they had applied for the position and they didn't get it, and so they were critical. Anything you did was the wrong thing. And I try to cut folks like that some slack, because sometimes they're great employees and it just takes some time for them to settle down and go, well, okay, this person's they're not a double or
Exactly.
something. But then sometimes that's not the case, right? Sometimes you end up in a situation where the person is going to continue to have a bad attitude and create a toxic environment, and then of course that you deal with that differently. You know?
That is a question I actually had for later. Let's address that now, is especially for our new leaders. And then there are a lot of current who struggle with this situation, is keeping that toxic employee on too long, to the point where it affects the entire team and it affects performance and attitude and engagement. So how would you best handle that situation? How would you advise a new leader?
My style is, hey, let's go to lunch, which you got to be careful depending on the environment that you're in. That could be perceived as the same thing as come to my office. Or you could say, hey, what are you doing right after work? And go find something. It doesn't have to be dinner. Get them out of their element, go bowling, do something, and tell them, say, I want to get you out of the office because here's what I'm seeing. And give them an opportunity to, have a conversation with you and try to work with that person initially. Right?
What does getting them out of their element do?
It allows them to be more personable.
Be more
And
themselves, right?
be more themselves. You
Yeah.
want them to be completely honest, because you may find out that there's something else going on that's driving this divisive behavior, and it's something that you can fix. You can work with them on something. I mean, maybe there was something that happened with their significant other, job change. Now there's a dynamic where maybe they need to come in an hour early and leave an hour early, and that would just make a world of difference. But they were too afraid to ask that. They just had a bad attitude. There's a blue million different possibilities and things that could be the case.
Well, they see you, I think, as more approachable that way as well. And I don't know, as a new leader, I always thought, stick to the rules, don't deviate. You can't show favoritism over one another. And if you take them out to dinner, that's favoritism. When in fact, it is just the opposite. It is, like you said, getting to know them and giving them an opportunity to get to know you, right? And a key thing I heard in all of that was, don't make assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to make assumptions. You sometimes you got to take a deep breath, because there's times when you're going to want to call people into your office and, what is your problem? What are you doing? But you don't want to do that. Take a deep breath and assess the situation, and try to do it in a way where you're not singling them out in the crowd. And once again, standard disclaimer applies. There are some times when there's something that happens that is so egregious that it has to be dealt with immediately. I'm not saying never do that, but 9 times out of 10, being able to take a step back and figure out a different approach is the better way to do it.
So I hear you. So SOP is not some of the leaders that I've seen, which is, I feel emotional, so I'm going to unload on you. You're my problem, so I'm calling you into the office, going to let you have it, and therefore think that the problem is resolved.
Right.
I think we both probably experienced that.
Right. And then ultimately it comes right back. Because you're not really addressing the core.
It multiplies the problem, frankly. And, that takes us into a culture question. How important is, the leadership's treatment of people to building a culture for the company?
You have to have an environment where people are going to naturally do the right thing. And the only way you're going to get that is if you have a great workplace environment. And that boils down to culture. And it starts with leadership.
Now, I've seen companies succeed and sometimes even thrive with a toxic culture. So what's happening behind the scenes that the leaders are unaware of? Well, they're seeing the return on their investment. They've got the ROI. What's happening long term?
Well, toxic environments, they can work in a vacuum. There's usually another determining factor, right? Like the toxic environments that I've seen in the past have existed when it was more of an employer's market versus an employee's market. There just weren't a lot of extra jobs going around. Or if you're in a geographic location where the vocation that you're in is very niche, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And there's no other options, and the employer knows that, then you can operate in a toxic situation and be profitable. But it's really a waste to operate that way. There's so many efficiencies that are lost, and you're you may be profitable, but I promise you will not be as profitable as you would be if you had a good culture.
So you said you promise we can be more profitable as a company by choosing that kindness and that mutual respect. How so? Are you talking about, efficiency within teams and then that saves money? I mean, what exactly are you talking about?
Well, the specifics of it, I'll invoke the Peter Gibbons statement. And for those of you who don't know, Peter Gibbons is a fictional creator, fictional creation of Mike Judge from the movie Office Space. And
Okay,
there's a line, there's a great line from that movie where he says something to the effect of, people come in and work just hard enough to not get fired. And that's what happens in a toxic work environment. And they nailed it. That's exactly what happens. And if you've got an environment that people want to be engaged in, they want to work, they enjoy what they do, they enjoy who they, just everything about it is great, then you're going to have people bring ideas to you, things that you would have never thought of. Hey, why don't we do this over here? Well, yeah, why don't we do this, right? Or if there's something where there's a deadline, or it would just be way better if it were taken care of, you may have a team that's willing to stay an hour or two late one night just to get it done, because they're just looking forward to getting it taken care of. You don't even have to request that. They're just going to do it because they're happy, they're proud of what they're doing, and they get to see the fruits of their labor. Get out of the way and let them succeed.
Let them do it.
Let them do it.
There's tons of leaders out there today, as I'm talking with people, I'm looking on social, that are so pissed that my staff aren't engaged and they're not going above and beyond. And, my generation did that. We just did it naturally. What do you say to them? I'm sitting here just grinning from ear to ear, because I know that when someone feels comfortable and happy and good about the work they're doing and the team they're on, and I also, disclaimer here, we're not saying that this is the rainbows and unicorns kind of environment. There never is that. There's always controversy, there's always conflict, but we're talking again about transparent communication and mutual respect and so forth. People will naturally go above and beyond, put in the extra time, because they're excited about the work they're doing. And they're excited about how they're being treated.
Correct. And you're right. It's not always Skittles and beer. Sometimes you've got those people that they don't want to show up. They're going to have a bad attitude. They're going to steal from the company or do all kinds of terrible things, or there's people out there that are just plain rotten, and you got to get them out. And that's part of it, because they're going to create that toxic, they're going to add a toxic element there, and you just don't need that.
That's that 2% rule, right? Back in the day, I had an HR manager tell me that they wrote handbooks for 2% of the people. 98% of the people are there to do the job, do it well, abide by company rules, provided that they are also being treated fairly in return. And it's those 2%ers.
I've been in environments before where the 98% of the workforce knows that person needs to go.
Yep.
And when it eventually happens, there's empathy for the leader who's having to do that, because they don't really want to do that, because that's not, I mean, they've got to do it because that individual's creating a problem. But hey, after it happens, there's usually a conversation that takes place. Hey, sorry you had to go through that, but I'm glad you did it. That type of thing.
Well, because the employee saw it coming months before
Oh yeah,
the leader did.
Yeah, the group of the group as a whole is gonna notice that.
Why do you think that some leaders don't notice it as quickly? We talked in the beginning about knowing your people, doing a lot of observation work. So why is it that this happens so frequently?
Well, I would argue that the person that's in the leadership position really isn't paying attention to their environment like they should be. And that's why it's important that you've got to stay tuned into that environment. And that means that if your role, whoever your boss is, if you're dealing with either a board or an owner or however the company's structured, if you're in a position where you need to spend the bulk of your time trying to, say, maybe expand the business, or where you're not boots on the ground or in the office or in that environment, then maybe you need to create another position, inside of that organization that can then help manage some of those things.
Okay.
I mean, that's all part of it. And I can say it. It's a lot easier. I mean, I can say it, but it's difficult to do those things.
Well, it is, especially if, the overarching message of the company is always, we don't have enough money, right? Then you go to tap the well for additional layer of management. And then you've got someone higher up that either fears or dislikes too much hierarchy, too many.
But you can't afford not to do that.
I agree. 100%.
Especially if your role is, if you are trying to develop new products, or you're working with another team, with the upper management team, to do some of those things, and you don't have as much time, you either need to balance your time out differently, or you need to put somebody into a role that can really help keep harmony in check, and someone that you can trust and really have those conversations with.
Well, it also goes to, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but it goes to multitasking, right? I was raised in an environment where you were told that multitasking was made for a brilliant leader. And I knew then that it didn't, because when your attention is divided in 7 different top priority places, you're never going to perform well in any of those 7. Right. So what I hear you saying is, if there is a huge priority being placed on product development, advancing the company, growing the company, and that is, a major part of your role, and you're not giving enough attention to it, then put someone in place who can be your number one, right? Your advisor, your sidekick, your Robin to your Batman.
Correct.
How important is communication?
Oh, I think it's very important. It helps to know what is our strategy. Where are we going with this? What's the overall? It goes back to, if the employees know what your mission is and the direction of the company and future projects, then you're going to have people that are going to volunteer ideas. And maybe you've been doing something a certain way and you're kind of shifting things. The boots on the ground are going to have ideas. They're going to help you run things more effectively. So if you're transparent with them, then you are, in a way, you're creating a situation where they're going to come to you and be able to, you're going to get a lot more interaction by being transparent.
Yeah, the irony is you're going to get a lot more from your boots on the ground employees when they're involved in.
Yeah, I would argue that transparency is going to foster engagement.
Agreed. So give us an example of that when you're trying to get your employees to buy into a vision or a changed goal or a new mission, or maybe it's the company's mission overall doesn't change. How do you get the buy-in? How do you engage in that transparent communication?
You've got to believe in who you work for. if you're there and you're working for the company, it can't be just, well, I earn a great paycheck. I don't believe in what we're doing here, but it pays the bills, and I'm able to go buy nice things. I think that's the wrong attitude. I think you have to believe in what you're doing, believe in the mission statement. And it's not always possible to do that. Even no one is going to go work for someone and believe in
Right.
100% of what's going on all the time. And I think that's important as a leader. Sometimes you need to communicate the fact that, hey, we're here to get a job done. I know some of you may not want to do this. I understand that. Because I don't understand it completely myself, but we got a job to do, so we're going to do it, and we'll get past that so we can keep on doing the other stuff that we want to do.
I am so glad that you brought that up. When I was a young leader, I was always afraid to do that. I was afraid to tell the truth, to say, I don't completely understand, because I was afraid that my team would look at me like, what the hell's she doing in her role? Did you ever run across that? Did you ever run across a time where you're like, oh, I just don't want to because I feel like they'll think I'm incompetent? Or have you always, won by using that type of communication?
I've always won by using that type of communication, but the group that you're working with, they have to understand that if there is something that is happening inside the company, it's coming down from the top brass, that you have the gumption to go back to the top brass and say, this is a problem for these reasons. The people that you are working with, they have to understand that you are actually going back and communicating those things.
That you got their back.
That you got their back. Yep.
I've always thought mid-level management is probably the hardest in the company.
Rock in a hard place. Always a rock in a hard place. Yep.
You're always trying to please, not please, I shouldn't say please, because if you are trying to please someone, then you're going about it the wrong way. But you're always trying to maintain that harmony, as you said, between upper management, your team, and even your peers, because there are times that your peers are more or less on board than you are.
Yep, it's a delicate balancing act at that point.
You really have to be on your toes all the time, right? And that is stressful. And to any of our listeners that think, oh my gosh, does it ever stop? I'm going to say it doesn't. It really doesn't. You're dealing with so many personalities and constant environmental and business need and industry change, especially over what we've seen the last 5 to 10 years. So you have to be, well, how do you maintain yourself, Jason, in that, to be able to pivot at any moment and maintain that harmony? What do you do as a leader to make sure you're capable and able and available?
I try to remove myself from the work environment from time to time. If you've ever been in a situation where there's an interaction with a peer or with the top brass, if something's just off kilter, taking a lunch and going and sitting in a park and just trying to clear your mind, a lot of times that will, for me anyways, that will allow me to come up with other ideas and how to deal with scenarios. And
you're practicing mindfulness at that point, right? You're saying, I don't, another mistake I've made in my career, which is just stay there and try to do it harder, work harder, do more, and eventually you'll get to the right answer. When in fact, anybody listening, I'm telling you, please don't do that. It messes with you, it messes with your mental and your physical abilities, and you're not doing any favors to your team or to the company, right? So remove yourself from the environment. What if
take a deep breath and then try to look at the big picture. And sometimes you need to change your view to be able to do that.
Good point. Very good point. So what about the leader who's sitting out there going, great, I get it, I hear you, I can employ some of those things, but I live a lot in fear of just what my boss is going to say, losing my job, that person that lives there and says, I don't know how to get out of that. I don't know how to change that for myself.
And this is for leadership or for anybody. If you are in a situation where you are constantly living in fear, then you need to change where you're at. It can sound daunting, but look around, evaluate where you're at, and make a change. And maybe you are in that environment where the industry you're in, you'd have to up and move, then up and move, because it is not worth living in fear or always being afraid. It'll wreck your health, and you can't be you can't be an effective human being living in that mental state. So you can either move, or you could say, I'm going to do something different, career wise altogether. But don't go down the path. Don't get stuck in the mental loop where I can't do anything. Don't do that. That is a mistake. So.
And have you been in that scenario where you thought, all right, I've been unhappy for a bit. I've evaluated it. I don't like where this path is taking me, both from a personal and professional standpoint, and made the change? And if so, how did it feel? I mean, can you describe?
Well, it's easy if you're in a constant fearful state, then it's easy to get in a loop where you believe you honestly believe that there's nothing you can do to fix that situation.
Yeah.
You've got to break out of that loop, take a deep breath, and say, I don't want this in my life anymore, and then go find something someplace else. It's out there for you. You can do it. You've just got to say, what's step number one? Right? What's step number one? Maybe my resume is way out of date. Take a deep breath, fix that resume.
One step at a time, right?
One step at a time, and fix it. Yep. And you can do it. But you've got to have the belief that you can do it. And guess what? If you're living in that fear loop, you're never going to believe that. You're never going to take that first step. So you've got to break that, and then start taking steps towards exiting that situation.
I would also add, if I may, listen to the people around you who know you, who love you, who want the best for you. They are going to tell you the truth, right? So go to your truth tellers, go to the people that will give you the hard info no matter what, and really listen to what they're saying. To say if they're saying you've changed, you're a different person, you don't smile as much, you seem unhappy, any of those things, engage them in that conversation, right? And have them tell you more about what they're observing. And if you can't let go of the fear yourself, find somebody who can help you. Find a mentor. Go seek out someone who's done what you want to do, and get steps, get the natural tools and the steps it takes to get you there.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's that first initial step. You got to break out of that fear loop. That's the key.
It is just one little thing. And you guys, I think Jason's saying the same thing. It can make a world of difference to your future and your future self. Switching gears just a tiny bit, but we're talking about people relations. Have you ever worked with someone that you just could not get along with, and how did you deal with it?
Yes, I have. I have worked in the past. I had an individual that I worked with that was divisive, and they were actually in a leadership role. They didn't organizationally, it wasn't organized where I reported to them, but they created constant issues, went out of their way to create problems intentionally. Yeah.
Wow.
And ultimately I took a deep breath and said, I don't want to work anymore because of this situation. Yes, on three different times I went to the person of the organization that I reported to, one of the owners of the company, and said, this is the issue. And they always said something along the lines of, oh, that's just how they are, or something like that. And after getting that answer 3 times, I said, well, I'm not interested in working with somebody that just wants to be divisive. So I made a plan and executed on it. So in this particular organization, the company, the owners were making a lot of money, And there was no need to really, in their minds, there was no need to really change anything because they were making great money as it was. I would argue that they could have made even more money, right? It goes back to that, motivating by fear versus harmony. And they went through several employees while I was there because of this other individual's actions and just demeanor. And of course that's bad, which by the way is a great interview question. If you from when you're looking for that new employment, you can ask, what kind of turnover do you guys have here?
And hope they tell you the truth.
And hope they tell you the truth. Yeah. Because guess what? If they tell you one thing and then the water cooler discussions a couple months into your hire turns out to be something different, guess what? You need to keep looking.
So I'd like to address also for our listeners, if you are a leader who has been taught or somehow just internally believes that a person coming and complaining to you is just complaining, I would offer this. Yeah, it's your role to figure out, are they just complaining because they're unhappy or that's their personality or they're, they've got a victim mindset, right? Or is there some truth in what they're sharing with you? Because you don't have to act on what they're saying, but by listening and hearing and reading between lines and asking questions, you can more quickly discern if there's a genuine underlying problem with people or team. Now, Jason, that leads me to the subject of engagement, which is a huge topic right now with companies to say, I can't find employees. Employees are too lazy. They don't want to work. They want more money than I can pay or I'm willing. But is it the employee? Is it the leader? Is it the company? What do you think is happening in the world today?
Yes.
Right? Not an easy answer, is it?
There was a sense of ownership within companies. You go back to the 60s and the 70s. There were companies out there that had a mindset of, we're going to take care of our employees, and then the employees took care of the company. And you went to work, and if you got on with a great company, you were there. And then after so many years, you got a gold watch, and and then eventually you have a retirement party, and then you retired. And that's kind of how life was. And that has changed and morphed. And my professional experience has been, you go and you work for somebody, and then if you want to increase the size of your paycheck, then you've got to go find employment elsewhere. So there's a breakdown of loyalty in both directions.
Right.
And I think we need to get back to having that organization where people really want to work for you, because word's out on the street that you guys are doing things the right way. And I think we've got to get back to that. And I know that history is cyclical, so I have great hope that we're moving back into that. If you're doing it the right way, people are going to want to work for you. You're going to attract talent.
Yeah. So let's go back to the leadership level real quick. If you've got someone disengaged on a team, they're already there with you. You brought them in the door and thought they were a good candidate, and they're really disengaged. And maybe it's a change, maybe it's not. How do you deal with that as a leader? Is it your responsibility as a leader?
So you're talking about somebody that you hired
Mm-hmm.
and just brought them in, we're talking they're there for a month and they're just disengaged, or
Okay, so let's do it twofold, because I get where you're going. It could be a month as our first scenario, and our next scenario is they've been there a while, they've been a good producer, maybe not top notch, but you know them to always be available for you, and then they disengage. So in those two different scenarios, what do?
You got to talk to them. You have to, right? In either scenario.
Two words you use: help and resources. I can't emphasize that enough. We as humans naturally respond to someone saying, are you okay? Can I help you? What resources can I provide you? Now, Yes, we've all had scenarios where we've offered that and someone says, back off, I don't need your help, I'm okay the way I am. That's a them issue, not you. That just tells you even more that there's an underlying problem that as a leader you should dig into. But offering help as a leader, offering resources, offering training, offering assistance, I don't know, for me, it feels like you're only going to win by doing that. You're going to win by seeing an improvement in the person or learning more when they reject it. You feel the same?
I do. Yeah. And you may find out that there's something you're doing and you need to listen. If you are part of the problem, or if you are the problem, take a deep breath and be receptive of that. Lose the ego and once again
wield it.
And not wield it, right? And if that's what you're doing, you're probably doing it wrong.
How do you keep up your leadership acumen? What would you say to our listeners is the best way for you to continue to improve upon what you know and what you've learned so far?
I think self-observation is really, sure, observe others, try to pay attention, but pay attention to your own emotions and your own goes back to keep your ego in check, and always be looking for ways. What can I do better? What can I do better? Not necessarily what can they do better. What can I do better?
Right. Jason, I knew this would be great. I want to thank you so much today for sharing of your time and of your wisdom and of your experience. Is there anything anything you want to add, or a last piece of advice to leave us with today?
There is. If you are an individual and you are in a toxic environment, in any workplace, personally or otherwise, right? Figure out how to remove yourself from that, because you don't want to live in fear. You want to live in a state of happiness, I guess would be a better way. Just joy. And you can't have that if you're working and you're just fearful all the time, you're unhappy with what you do. And even if you're in a company and it's not necessarily a toxic environment, but you're just not happy with where your career is or something along those lines, figure out what to do. Do right by yourself. Do right by the people that you're working for. It will ultimately be a win-win.
Jason, once again, thank you so much for kicking off season 2 for us of Illuminating Leadership. And you guys, I thank you for being here, for coming with us into season 2, and go do you and find that joy. Until next time, bye.